This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. This is episode 250 of the show, following one of the uglier losses that we've experienced in recent history for the Arizona Cardinals. I'm your host, Jess Root, from cardswire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site, all about your Arizona Cardinals. And my co-host is Seth Cox from revengeofthebirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site. And the two of us, if you're new to the show, we both run fan sites. We both are reporters, analysts, and fans of the team. You guys, you can call us fanalists. But we've got some inside and some outside perspectives. And we've been talking about the Arizona Cardinals since 2013. In this edition of the show, we have a lot to talk about. The Cardinals lost to the Los Angeles Rams 34-7. I think you could clearly say it was their worst loss of the season. We're going to rant about three things each. What are three things that we just have to get off our chest about how the Cardinals played? There's some things going on with the show. Not with the show, but rather with the team. Haason Reddick, first round pick in 2017. He has been benched, and they're looking at a position change. We'll talk about that. Tramaine Brock, veteran cornerback, was released. We'll talk about that. As the season comes to close with 4 more games, we reset expectations. What are the expectations for the next 4 games? And, well, as we look forward to 2020, if we want the Cardinals to get better, they have to leapfrog somebody in the NFC West, a division that's actually been pretty dang good this year. Who's going to be that team? And lastly, we're going to look ahead to the Pittsburgh Steelers, whom they play in Week 14, and how can they possibly beat the Steelers? That's what's coming up next on this show. So, Seth, we're back from the holiday weekend. It was a terrible ending. Other than the Cardinals game, how'd things go for you?
It was good. I mean, we hosted Thanksgiving for the first time at our new house, so that was fun. And then we always do my family Thanksgiving the next day, so it was a nice family weekend, and we got to watch the ASU game, even though that game was extremely boring. You have to have enjoyed watching ASU win again. So I mean, outside of the Cardinals game, it was a productive and a fun weekend.
Yeah, that was the case. Is that it was restful, it was relaxing. There was a minor mishap at one of the local stores for Black Friday for a purchase that my wife and I made for our children that almost didn't happen because the store was dumb. But ASU won, yes. Cardinals not only lost, okay, I kind of understand, but the way they lost was just absurd. So that's what we're gonna start off with in this show. What we're going to go off on, we're going to just basically rant about a couple of things each one. Seth, what are your 3 rants you want to go off on? Because I don't want to relive too much of this game because there is too much to unpack the fact that everything was bad. So let's give us your 3 big rants or big complaints about how things went on Sunday.
I think the first thing was for me how unprepared they were for a game coming out of a bye week. It just, I know Kyler kind of talked about it, and it's kind of odd to now go back and listen to what he was saying and the fact that he was, he didn't like taking time off. He didn't want to be away and things like that. And it was almost like he was hinting early that like this was something he had a concern about for this team, and then they come back in and it's exactly that, and you're like, whoa, like this kid saw this coming, and that's that's unfortunate. I've never seen a Cardinals team, and maybe I'm just misremembering, that came out of the bye that looked so bad. However, I mean, this has been, I did go back just to other teams and look at things. And I mean, New Orleans came out of their bye and got blown out by Atlanta, 26-9. You know, teams that you expect to put up good games. You know, Cleveland came out of their bye, lost 2 in a row to New England and Denver. Not that they're a good team by any means, but you wouldn't expect them to come out of their bye and look worse. So, you know, the Steelers came out of their bye and looked really sloppy against the Miami Dolphins in their game. Obviously, they ended up winning that game, but it was a lot closer than anybody expected. We saw even the Rams come out of their bye and they lost to the Steelers 17-12. So I mean, it seems like for whatever reason this year, a lot of teams are coming out of their bye underprepared, and that's surprising to me. But especially for a first-time head coach, you would expect them to come out prepared and ready to go, and that was basically the opposite of what we saw.
We can blame it on the fact he gave them an extra day off. He was supposed to have them practice on Wednesday, and they didn't. We can blame that.
Right?
Now, he won't ever do that again.
No, I mean, unless they are at, like, you know, compared to this year, 10-2 or 9-3 at their bye. Yeah, like that's the first thing he's going to think about is like, man, they really bit me in the butt last year.
Right. What else? I mean, one of the things for the first time I noticed that Cliff was critical of how they played. He's usually been very, like, he talks about team, we, everyone, and he said we just didn't have the juice, and he put it on the coaches as well. It's just really interesting to see how things played off, because it felt like 2018. That's what it felt like. It was that sort of game. It was terrible. There was nothing to the stadium was half empty by the end of the third quarter. It was terrible. What's your next major complaint from that game?
I think my next complaint is something that we've kind of talked about before, and it's just the fact that it's becoming more and more obvious now that whatever the idea was of that Terrell Suggs comment, or, you know, whatever the rumor was or about stealing, you know, he didn't feel comfortable stealing from the Ravens. It seems like it's pretty apparent at this point that that's an accurate statement. I mean, more than anything, his effort level, and I mean, people that have listened to the show know how I feel about doing stuff like this, but I hate questioning the effort of these guys. But his effort just looks like it's not even there. Like he's just trying to get through the season, stay healthy. And I mean, I get that. I mean, he's old. He's put in a lot of time, and it just feels like at this point he is stealing. Like he's not exactly involved or wants to be out there anymore.
Well, and the thing is, it's one thing if he were able to be productive. He's had like no stat. Like he had 0 stats, 42 snaps of what you and I produced in that football game production. He was out there. And it's compounded by the fact you see him getting so little practice time. Like every week he gets 2 veteran days off. And there's been several weeks where he hasn't practiced at all and has played on Sunday. He is getting an interesting treatment. And at the start of the season, it felt fine because he was producing, but he's been stuck on 5.5 sacks for a few weeks now and hasn't really done much. And yeah, it's looking more and more like he is what everyone feared but didn't really believe, because he had the 7 sacks last year. Like, oh, he's still got some juice left. He He has no sizzle left him. He's just T right now. He's just T. There's no sizzle at this point in his career, which, good for him. He's lasted as long as he did. You get to finish here at home, but it's painful to watch, and it's frustrating because we had hoped for more from him.
Yeah, and I mean, you just hope to see a little, like you said, a little juice, a little effort, and I think that's always my biggest thing is like, if he doesn't have anything left, that's fine. I mean, there's really nothing wrong with that, but it when it looks like there's a effort issue, that's where I struggle.
What's your final big rant or complaint or what you want to get out throughout this game?
I think the final thing is that it just seemed like the Cardinals in general, we talked about preparedness, but it seemed like from the first snap there was this lack of idea of what was going to happen. I mean, the offensive line had their worst game of the season. I mean, it was an awful performance, both in pass pro and in the run game. I think this was probably their worst day in the run game. And so when you kind of look at the whole thing, it sucks that in a game coming out of their bye against a division rival, coming off of, 3 solid, especially on the offensive side of the ball, performances, that's how you come out and play. Like, that's just disheartening because and Jess and I aren't ready to do anything like this. Like, we're not going there, but it does make you raise an eyebrow about the effectiveness of the coaching that's going on, because a lot of that is just a coaching issue, where they were just flat out out-coached in terms of preparation and drive, but then they were also just from the fact of there seemed to be no consequences for the poor play that was occurring on the field during the game. And
maybe that's because there's not much in terms they can do in terms of personnel. That's the other thing. Now, for me, my first major complaint, I'm going to point to one particular play and point it at one particular person, and that's Patrick Peterson. As you've probably recalled over the many years, I defend players right and left. I'm optimistic, but Peterson's play just doesn't. There's some disinterest in things, whether it's discomfort or lack of comfort level in the scheme or whatever it is. He's lost a step. He doesn't want to be here. I don't know what it is, but case in point, the 48-yard play by Robert Woods. Now, the play never should have gotten to that side of the field. It was a third down play that was going to get bottled up after a minimal game. He breaks free, breaks back to the right side into open field. And then Jared Goff gets out there and blocks for him, and he blocks Patrick Peterson out of the play. Now, my gut instinct as a fan, as an analyst, I haven't played the game. Also, I've never played organized football. If you guys listened to the Burns and Gambo show here locally in Phoenix the day after, Gambo got some comments from some current or former players as to what Patrick should have done. Patrick made a bad football play on the field. There's a couple other things that he should have done. He didn't even have to engage with Goff. But if he's going to get taken out of the play, when you have the quarterback giving himself up as a blocker, that's one of those moments where you have to punish him for it. So what he should have done, and he made a business decision, you decide to square him up and put him on the ground. If you're going to get blocked out of the play, at least get blocked out of the play with some effort. And that was the main thing that I had there. All he had to do was head fake Goff and then cut inside and make the tackle. But he's just been a lack of attention, a lack of effort on some plays. And what was more for me, the comment more than anything, it came from Cliff Kingsbury, not in his regular press conference, but in his radio interview after his press conference when he was pressed about Patrick Peterson. He said he's still a work in progress. And the problem with that is, yes, he's been back only, 6 weeks. A guy with his resume should not, in any circumstance, be considered a work in progress. He's shown some flashes, Cliff said, and then there's some other plays where he's got to work. I mean, come on, he's supposed to be a future Hall of Fame cornerback, one of the greatest to ever play the game, and we're talking about effort. We're talking about being a work in progress in his 9th season, about just tackling a receiver. That's absurd to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like you said, it's just an effort thing. And how you don't put forth the effort that's the baffling part, because like you said, I shouldn't say all you have to do, but avoiding the contact is one thing, but then avoiding the contact of a quarterback when you have an opportunity to really, maybe even inflict some pain. I'm not saying malicious.
Right. You don't.
Dirty.
It wouldn't even be a blindside block. If you're going to get taken out of the play, you square him up and throw him to the ground. Just shove him to the ground. You are strong. He's taller, but you better be a stronger player than him, because you're supposed to be able to be physical. That was just, come on. That's I couldn't accept that. Even that's not the type of player he is. He's not the guy to inflict pain. He's never been one to do that. But come on, don't get taken out of the play by Jared Goff on a block. The other thing, number 2 on my list, is just, what is this defense? This defense doesn't make any sort of sense. They didn't stop the run. They don't seem to stop anyone. And the number of plays where there are players wide open, what are they doing? This is the part I don't understand. Are they really scheming for wide open players? And if they're not scheming, what is happening? Jordan Hicks says that they've practiced these plays, 95% of these plays, that there's a bust, that there's a lack of communication somewhere. Hicks actually gets himself into trouble. Cliff said that himself, is that he spends so much time before the play getting people lined up and telling them what they're supposed to do. He sometimes exposes himself, which I can believe. But you can't have on the regular, you can't have Todd Gurley wide open. You can't have Robert Woods wide open. You can't have Tyler Higbee wide open consistently. The number of just wide open. It's one thing to have a defense where they are tightly covered and it's well schemed. You watch the Seahawks game against Minnesota. The number of big plays that were because Wilson hit a guy in stride in a tight window on a slant route inside that was, you couldn't really cover it much better. But it wasn't just Goff threading the needle. It was Goff throwing a wide. It was like a bad college defense. Oh, wait. Like Cliff Kingsbury's Texas Tech defenses. Guarding against teams that just have superior offensive talent. Now, we know there's a talent issue on defense. But at this point of the season, we're at week 13. There shouldn't be busted coverages anymore. There shouldn't be mistakes, mental mistakes. There shouldn't be any concerns about learning the scheme. We're in December. It's absurd now, and it's just reopened the possibility of, well, is Vance Joseph the guy? And, well, even if Vance Joseph isn't the guy, does this team know how to coach defense? Because Vance Joseph's teams have never been good against the tight end. Chuck Harris, who writes for me, he put a stat out there that, Vance Joseph's defenses have been historically bad. Traditionally, not historic, like bad, but they've been consistently not good against tight ends. And it's not just tight ends. They give up yards to receivers. They give up yards to tight ends. They're giving up rushing yards. It's comically bad.
Yeah, it is comically bad, and that's the unfortunate reality of it. I mean, you look at what they've been as a team this year, and it's basically, and you hate saying this, it's basically a garbage defense that, again, I hate there. You hate questioning effort, but at the same time, you look at the way that they've played, and and you wonder, is it the players, the coaches? Is there an effort issue? I mean, I was talking to some people, and they flat out wondered if what we saw from the offense was just a result of I don't want to say they don't care, but they know that it doesn't matter what they do, that it won't matter because they will, the defense is going to ruin it. And you hate to see that or hear that, but at the same time, that is kind of what it looked like, right?
Yeah. Yes. Number 3 on my list is kind of the offensive game plan. They got beat pretty much in every phase of the game. Now we go to series number 1 on offense. They run the ball. It's 3rd and 5, and they go 3 and out because Damiere Byrd runs the wrong route. He keeps going instead of coming back, and Kyler throws it into the turf. It looks like he just throws it into the turf because Damiere's not where he's supposed to be. Now, number 1, Damiere, who is listed at the very back of the depth chart, he'd been inactive at least for the previous 2 games. Why is he active? What was there in the game plan for him to do that actually at the end of the game he did not register a single reception? The offensive game plan didn't seem to make sense. The offensive line played poorly. Aaron Donald dominated that game, was a disruptor in the middle of the line, and you have to wonder. We've seen other teams find success against the Rams by simply making it a point to double Aaron Donald pretty much every time, and then letting the other and then kind of going at him that way. Granted, they didn't get the edge protection. Dante Fowler had a field day. It just feels like they went in with a bad plan. Maybe Cliff overthought it. I don't know. But you shouldn't get derailed after 1 3 and out. It reminded me of the last couple of years of Bruce Arians, and it would happen on the regular. It would be a Michael Floyd drop or a Michael Floyd penalty that would sort of derail everything, and then everything went south. And we already know that the defense is bad, and so the defense gives up the touchdown. You go 3 and out, you give up another score. Well, in that case, they had got a blocked field goal. I mean, a missed field goal, and they come back and still can't do anything after, Charles Clay. He shows some life, 25-yard catch, and then you go 3 and out after that. They just couldn't string anything together, and that's the downside of this offense. This offense requires rhythm, and if their defense is going to be bad, things snowball in a hurry, and then you end up with this game, which, in a way, I will say that it felt like short memory. We kind of forgot things. Because I think we felt the same way about the Carolina game. Only they just produced more points. But the feeling after that game was kind of the same thing, just with more points put up on the board, because the Cardinals offense really did go south. It was like this for the whole game against the Rams. We've seen it before this year. It got out of hand. Kyler got hit a lot. He got out of rhythm. He never got in a rhythm, and he got in a rhythm at the end at the garbage time when the defense basically stopped. But I don't know. I don't want to talk about this game anymore. I don't know about you, so let's move on. We've got other pressing topics to discuss, such as, hey, we've got another first-round draft pick bust coming up. So coming up to the Rise Up See Red podcast, we're talking about Haason Reddick, his new role, and how it's changing. That's coming next on the Best Hour of Cardinals Talk on the Web. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the Best Hour of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Haason Reddick, he's now on the bench. No longer. He got 1 defensive snap on Sunday, gave up a touchdown and a goal line defense to a tight end. We saw him go from at first, the first of the years he was coming back from an injury, he got worked in slowly. He was in sub packages, and Joe Walker was in base. Then Haason took over, played every snap over the course of the season. I think it was against the Giants that Joe Walker took over in base again, and then against the Rams, Joe Walker took over everything. Now, that's not surprising, except for the fact, as you and I know, Joe Walker is not a guy you want to have in your starting lineup. He's a guy you want on your team, but not a guy you want playing 79 defensive snaps. He tries hard. He puts forth the right effort. He's probably a smart guy in terms of football, but he's not who you want in your starting lineup. Now we're moving on to they're talking about changing Reddick again. They're playing with the idea of practicing him at the outside linebacker position and trying to salvage him in some way as a pass rusher. I mean, Seth, what's left? What's left for Haason? Is there anything left for him on this team?
I think they're at the end of the rope, and it's just now you hope that he can become a type of a type of producer, somebody that can contribute in some way, and that it's not just another wasted, lost first round pick, because that's where it's been, and that's now where it's trending, and that's going to be tough for Steve Keim, and it's it's one of those interesting things that we've discussed, and when you begin to discuss the potential of moving on from Keim and things of that nature, you hear people say something to the effect of, let Keim, fix this, let him, get out of this. And then they also like to go with the idea of like, hey, the Cardinals need to focus on building the lines. Well, Steve Keim, his first 5 drafts were a guard, a linebacker, a tackle, a defensive lineman, and a linebacker, and only one of those may even be on the roster next year. And so, and there's a potential that none of them could be on the roster next year, depending on how this kind of experiment with Reddick goes. So, I mean, it's an interesting cross section to be like, no, you need to retain Keim, and then also, by the way, they need to draft. The only way they should draft is along the lines, and it's like, well, that's been a really bad drafting strategy for him so far. So I mean, it's unfortunate that that's where Reddick's at, but it's also the reality of that's kind of where they're at with Reddick, and now they're just looking to hopefully in some way salvage his career to the point where he is somewhat of a success.
Right. Now, it's become painfully clear because they've been patient with him. They've worked with him. His rookie year was kind of a mess. He actually started. I mean, when he was playing for Dejon Buchanan, the production was there. He was playing next to Carlos Dansby those first couple of weeks. He piled up the tackles. You could tell that, he was a little bit late on the instincts, but there was something there. He made a couple plays in coverage. Then he moved, and then with Marcus Golden's injury, he got moved to the edge. Then he gets moved to off the ball, playing a 4-3, more traditional linebacker, and he just, frankly, didn't have a clue. He had no idea how to play linebacker last year, worked his way into the lineup, put up some stats. Like, he had some volume stats last year. This year, there was the talk that he feels comfortable, but it's one of those picks they flat out missed on, because he had the athletic ability, his size, playing as a pass rusher in college, his athleticism and speed was able to get him wins one-on-one. He's not built for the edge. At 6'1", 235, He is the perfect frame for inside backer. He had the movement skills. He showed flashes of coverage ability at the Senior Bowl practices, but as we've seen, that was just a miss. The projection in the projection business, Keim overthought things. Now, in thinking back, when it was between, say, Haason Reddick and Reuben Foster, neither one of those picks worked out. It's just Reuben Foster flamed out for other reasons. Hassan's never picked up the nuances of playing linebacker, ever. He was still getting tricked by movement, pre-snap movement, and then he was a step slow on reading coverages, and so he was getting beat in coverage now. I will say, if we take away the expectation of being the number 13 pick, which it's hard to do, there is a chance that he can provide some value for this team. Because I unpacked some of the stats, and I wrote about this on Cards Wire on Tuesday, and I tweeted about it Monday night. I unpacked some of the stats to how he did as an edge player, because they're going to start practicing him at outside linebacker. He's played it before. He played it as a rookie. He had 12 games of it. And he was a part-time player. He was, if you had to go, because he had 261 snaps in 12 games at outside linebacker. He was the rotational guy behind Chandler Jones and Kareem Martin. Kind of what you get from Cassius Marsh this year. And in those 12 games, he had 16 tackles, 2 for a loss, so that's low. He had 2.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 5 QB hits, and 5 other hurries or pressures. That, in terms of pass rushing production, there was nothing special, but there was production. If you recall, you have to think back, he had a few almost sacks where you felt that if he got more time, if he didn't get switched mid-season, maybe he would have finished a few more plays. Now, Cassius Marsh is a 6-year pro in the same type of role. In 12 games this season, he's played 284 snaps. He's made more plays overall because he's got 33 tackles, so that's twice as many tackles as Reddick had. 6 for loss, that's more than Reddick had. But he only has, in terms of the pass rushing productivity, 1 sack and 3 QB hits. He hasn't forced any fumbles. So in terms of some potential there, Reddick, if he can show some of that this year, I still think that there's a little bit of value for him. Now, he's an utter disappointment as a number 13 pick. Because I think with his frame, and I talked to you about this, and I believe with his frame at 6'1", 235, he can't be a full-time player. But if he could carve out a niche as a rotational pass rusher and be able to at least produce the pressure, the disruption numbers that he did as a rookie this year and moving forward, there's some value of having him on this roster in a year from now, and maybe even beyond. Just not at premium contract, obviously.
Well, and that's the biggest thing, as you said, is like they got to figure out if he's worth even keeping around here, and if he's not, they need to move on. And it's unfortunate that it's come to this, because that was, that the continued flops at the same position is, I think, the reason that the Cardinals are honestly in the hole that they're in. And so when you look at it and you see what the Cardinals are right now, you see a team that, lacks talent up front. Well, a lot of that is just because they've had to draft and re-sign or draft and then go sign somebody to play for a draft pick, and that makes it, it becomes difficult to have success when you're continually having to find a way to get the same position filled every other year, but you're going from drafting to free agency back to drafting. So I mean, I've honestly never seen a team spend as much in terms of capital, whether it be free agent dollars or contracts or top 50 picks on an off-ball linebacker, and then just not have any good ones. I mean, Jordan Hicks has been fine, don't get me wrong, but it's not like he has raised the whole level of the defense with this play. He's been, he's done his job, but he's not quite at the point where he's going to raise all the talent around him either. So it's just unfortunate that that's where they are right now as a team.
It's a shame, and hopefully Reddick gets a little bit. Hopefully he shows something in practice so that he can get a few reps during the game. Because let's be honest, if you haven't noticed, the Cardinals do have one pass rushing package. They have one defensive package. I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever seen them be good at it because they've been so bad defensively. They have a package where they have 3 of their edge rushers in. So they have 3 outside linebackers, and they actually only have 1 down lineman. So if I'm charting it, it's a 1-5. And so they go with, say, Jonathan Bullard or Rodney Gunter as their 1 down lineman. You've got your 2 off-the-ball guys in Walker and Hicks. But then you've got 3 pass rushes. You've got Jones, you've got Suggs, and you've got Cassius Marsh. That third guy actually is probably the perfect role for Reddick in terms of his speed, the way because he has some pass rushing moves. Just don't ask him to try and watch his keys and his eyes for something tricky, or ask him to peel off and cover running back. That's gonna end poorly unless it's something he's repped a whole bunch. But I think I'm really hoping that he can show something, because at least you want to see him show something before he leaves, because he does seem like the type of player that would finally get it in year 6 and year 7, and then you're like, oh man. Calvin Pace was kind of that way, except he had one. He moved from off the ball to the edge, and he became pretty good in one season. Then he went on to have a really fine career. It's a different scenario, but I'd hate to see Reddick have the light turn on after he's already gone from the Cardinals.
Well, and that's always the concern. But I mean, which of these first round guys has that happened to? I mean, Jonathan Cooper's just a backup in the league. Dayon Buchanan was cut.
Up.
Is he in New York now too?
He's in New York now. He is.
And I saw he was playing awful this last game. I mean, no offense, but that whole defense is awful. And trust us, we know bad defenses in Arizona right now.
Kimdichie,
so I mean,
bleh.
Yeah, Kimdichie's out of the league. So I mean, I think the most successful guy they've drafted in that realm has been Kevin Minter. I mean, he's still getting some run with the Bucks. I mean, he's not a guy that is a difference maker for them by any means, but
yeah,
at least he's still getting some burn in the league, comparatively speaking, to the rest of these guys. So, I mean, It is what it is.
Coming next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, we're going to talk about the recent release of Tramaine Brock. Kind of a surprise, but is it really? That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Tramaine Brock was the latest casualty. They actually released 2 players. They released running back Zach Zenner and cornerback Tramaine Brock on Monday. Interesting to note kind of where the Cardinals are at this season. Zenner was no surprise. There's nothing fishy there because they had 3 healthy running backs. Zenner had been inactive for the last couple games. That was to be expected. But the Brock one came by surprise because, well, he'd started the first 6 games of the season. This was very Jamar Taylor-esque, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and Taylor played well. He was just released, but he had played okay for the Seahawks this year. Who's the guy that they had?
Bené Benwickery.
No, who's the other guy? Tramaine Williams. I mean,
Yes.
he wasn't released, but it's another one of those veteran guys that continues to show some production in the NFL still after they leave Arizona, and as of this taping, he was picked up by Tennessee, so they'll use him a little bit because I think Adoree Jackson's hurt.
If you want to call it failing up, he failed up. Even though let's be honest, he didn't fail. He was not bad. Pro Football Focus, whatever you want to, whatever stock, he had the best coverage grade. He was one of Vance Joseph's guys that knew the system coming in. It is interesting. I will note this. There was a change in his role. There was a change in his role after he came back from his injury. And perhaps this was kind of the plan the whole time. Because Tramaine had been playing in the slot. He'd been playing in the slot all year, even at the beginning of the year, when he was number one cornerback essentially, but on nickel he would slide inside. For the first time all season on Sunday against the Rams, he didn't. It was Byron Murphy. Now, he was still the third cornerback, and so he came in as a sub, but Byron slid inside, and Tramaine played outside. I have a theory on this. Now, it felt, and they said this on the radio, that the cutting of Brock after that loss felt like an emotional thing. Like Steve Keim said, I've got to do something. I'm going to cut this guy. And Cliff Kingsbury hinted at it. It wasn't in the press conference, but it was on the radio that he said a decision was made. Meaning, in my mind, that was all Keim. But it's like they were preparing for that moment. Maybe there had been things that Brock had been saying in the locker room in recent weeks. There's a note like he wasn't a good fit. Things are people saying that. You don't suddenly become a bad fit in December. But I do have a theory that they, especially with the season the way it went, when it became evident that Byron would be able to handle the slot, which is where they always envisioned him, then Brock became unneeded. And with guys like Chris Jones and Kevin Peterson that they want to play, they let Brock go. And the good thing about that is because he's a vested vet, even if he'd never been picked up on waivers, he was still going to get paid for the last month of the year. The rest of his salary was guaranteed. So there was that side. So maybe there was an element of maybe it was a DJ Swearinger type situation where maybe he was saying things and you could tell that his body language or the way he was interacting with the team or the coaches was changing. So it was time for him to go. But this appeared to have been coming because of the change in Byron Murphy's role.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, you want Murphy to play the position he's going to play moving forward. They're at the point now where, I mean, you obviously want to win every game still, but they need to figure out what they have on this roster as they go into what is unquestionably a massive offseason. And so when you look at it from those perspectives, I mean, if Brock is not in your long-term plans, then yeah, moving on makes sense. I mean, and I think you would do it with other guys too if they weren't as nondescript as a guy like Brock.
Right. Are you thinking like of a Terrell Suggs?
Yeah, like I mean,
if he weren't the name,
right?
I think he'd be on the street right now.
Exactly, and so I think that's kind of the situation they're in. I mean, they did the same thing with they moved on from DJ because DJ Swearinger because of performance, and now they're moving on from Brock because he's not a guy that's in the plans long term, and that makes sense to me. And I think there's other players. Terrell Suggs comes to mind. I would even say David Johnson probably comes to mind of that they would probably like to do the same, but there are other things prohibiting that at this point.
Coming next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, we've talked about expectations for it seems like the last 3 shows we've talked about our expectations for what's going on the rest of the season. Let's reset those again after we come back on the Rise Up See Red podcast. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. 4 games left. What are the expectations at this point? That loss sort of hurts because it felt like one of the winnable games, not because the Rams had been necessarily, because the Rams didn't look like the Rams, and the Cardinals would be coming off the bye, and they were coming back home. It seemed like the type of game that they should win, even if they weren't favored to win, that they should win. So they've got Pittsburgh at home, they've got the Browns at home, then they're on the road in Seattle and on the road in LA. 3 of those 4 teams have real playoff meaning. The Steelers are trying to stay alive. The Browns are pretty much done, but let's not forget the fact that that's a revenge game for Steve Wilkes. They have several staffers on that coaching staff that are former Cardinals staffers and players, so they want to show their best. They're going to want to put their best foot forward. And then you've got Seattle and LA. LA obviously still fighting their playoff life. And then Seattle, who will be battling for that top seed the way things are going. They now took over the lead in the NFC West. What sort of expectations do you have now that, okay, we have that drubbing, 4 games left? I said in one of the previous shows, if they should have in the final 6 games picked up 2 or 3 wins. Is that reasonable anymore? Or are we down to maybe win 1?
Yeah, I think you're at maybe win 1 until they show otherwise. I think that's the way you have to look at this now and that's what we've kind of done all seasons. We've reset our expectations. So, they started 0-2-1, or sorry, 0-3-1, and we reset our expectations. Then they won 3 in a row, and we said, okay, they're back kind of on track. And then they lost, and we were like, that was a loss. I mean, we kind of saw that coming, but it was a loss against the Saints. And then we're like, they're going to get blown out on Thursday Night Football. And you're like, hey, that was a game they were in. They get a defense stop. Who knows what happens? Maybe they can tie it up. Then the Tampa Bay game came, and you and I again bought in. Hey, this is a game they can win. And then all of a sudden, their defense falls apart. Then San Francisco game, I mean, it was really 30-26 or whatever. It wasn't, or 29-26, whatever. But at that point, you look at it and you're like, okay, that, if you just look at the score, you say to yourself, okay, that's about what I expected. But the way they lost, hurt so bad. And then you say, but if you give that effort against these next 3 teams, you feel like they can pull out, 2 of 3. And now you go out and just get completely, run over, and you go, I don't know if you're winning a game the rest of the season. So, I mean, that's just where it's at, unfortunately, is that it's going to bounce based on what they do every game. And right now, I would say it's, for me, it's closer to, I don't expect them to win again this season.
Which is really unfortunate because of where we were at one point. You shouldn't win 3 games in a row and then not win the rest of the year. And the fact that they've lost 5 in a row is troubling because they didn't do that all last year. But the fact of the matter is, at this point, as a fan, you just hope that things don't completely unravel, because that Rams game felt like an unraveling. And 2018 unraveled really quickly. It never sort of started right. It was unraveled from week 1. we don't want you need momentum. Like, some people don't believe in momentum, but if you look at the Bruce Arians' first year and Ken Wisenhunt's first year, they started the season strong, and that built some belief for the following year. If they fall apart in these last 4 games and end up going 3-12-1, I guess technically it's an improvement over last year. But all the goodwill and all the progress that you felt sort of disappears, and we're back at, we are firmly back at this week. Should they fire Steve Keim? Are they going to fire Steve Keim? Vance Joseph, people are at fire everyone. Fire everyone again. Cut everyone, fire everyone. Keep Cliff and Kyler, and then we don't care about the rest. Get rid of the rest. Cut Patrick Peterson, trade Chandler Jones, like everyone. Get rid of everyone. Start over, rebuild. And that's what that sort of loss does. And so we have to really hope. I mean, if they don't win again, it will really, really turn this season into a very big disappointment, because then they will have ended up losing 9 straight games to end the season. And that is really bad. Now, if they lose the next 4 games in heartbreaking form, it'll still suck. But you feel some positive moving forward. But I get the feeling that if they're going to lose games, if they don't get a win in the next couple of weeks, I think it'll fall apart. And I think there will be no choice but to make at least staff changes with Vance Joseph, if not with general manager. And then we're going to have a really, really messy offseason again.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what you're trying to avoid at this point is that messy offseason that creates this unknown of where they're headed. And I think that's the biggest issue right now, is that there just doesn't seem to be any tangible idea of where this team is headed and what they are. And I think that's a tough thing to sell to fans, because if you stay where you're at, you look like you don't care about the fans. But if you move on, you have to have a plan in place. And you and I have talked about it privately. I don't know who you're going to be able to sell as this upgrade to fans that kind of meets all of what they set last offseason as the requirements. A guy with head coaching experience that runs a 34 defense. I mean, that basically pigeonholes you to say, hey, Matt Patricia, if you get fired, can you come run the defense in Arizona, if you don't go back to New England? So, that's the thing, is you've talked so much about the 34 defense, and you've talked so much about having a guy Cliff can lean on and all of these other things. And then that sometimes, even though you mean it and you're trying to do it in a great way, it comes back to bite you, because now you're looking at it and you go, all right, well, I mean, that's what you told us you had to have. And now what? Are you not, like, is that not what you have to have?
Because remember, the 4-3 was the problem, right? That's what Michael Bidwell essentially made it sound like.
Right. And so that's where it comes down to, is now that you've talked yourself into this corner of, well, Steve Wilkes was the problem. He was the one that didn't know how to use the defensive talent that was on the roster. And now you're on your 3rd defensive coordinator in 3 years. And let's be honest, the defense hasn't been good in 3 years. I mean, it hasn't been this bad, but it hasn't been good in 3 years. And so is it the talent? Is it the coaching? Is it the guy who's made all the decisions? Like, that's what you kind of have to figure out at this point.
Coming next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, coming back to talk about 2020. we want to see expectation. We want to see better things from the Cardinals, but they've got to leapfrog somebody, right? That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. Back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We want to see the Cardinals improve next year. We don't want to be a last place team again. If they're last place team 2 years in a row under Cliff Kingsbury, guess what? Cliff Kingsbury might not stick around. Here's the problem. Look at this division. If you're looking right now in terms of power rankings, well, first, the Seahawks and the 49ers, two of the very best teams in the NFC. The Rams, still incredibly talented, they're just not right in sync. They're still in the playoff hump. They're on the outside looking in right now. But if you look at the USA Today power rankings, outside of the Cardinals, the NFC West has 3 top 15 teams and 2 top 5 teams. The Cardinals are going to have to leapfrog somebody next year. If they're going to do that, who do you think that's going to be?
I still think it'll be the Rams. They are kind of on what looks like a downslope. Now they've absolutely owned, and owned is a very loose word there because there's much more to it, but they have absolutely owned the Arizona Cardinals since Sean McVay got there. I mean, it's been and again, you're talking 3 head coaches, technically 4 offensive coordinators and 3 defensive coordinators, and they're 0-5 and have been outscored 164-32, meaning the Cardinals average less than a touchdown a game, and they give up over 30 points a game. That's hard to fathom, but that's 5 games, 2 with Bruce Arians as your head coach and James Betcher as your defensive coordinator. You know, then you had the Steve Wilkes debacle, so okay, that kind of makes sense. And now you're on Cliff Kingsbury. I mean, it's hard to imagine that one team can be this bad against another division opponent, but that's where they're at right now.
Well, here's the money stat right here. The Cardinals have scored fewer points combined in 5 games than the average points they're allowing the Rams per game in those 5 games. They've scored 32. The Rams are averaging 32.8 in 5 games.
Yeah, which, I mean, doesn't seem like it's a good thing. So so you just look at it, and I mean, it's just an unfortunate thing right now, and you have to figure out can you get better than them? And I think you can. I mean, you're not going to find a defensive talent, no matter how many people tell you that Quinnen Williams is the next Aaron Donald. He never was, so sorry, people. But, you know, the reality is that you can create a better team overall, and I think that's kind of what you're looking at right now is the best thing. San Francisco's one to watch, and I'll say that because they have a lot of guys that are going to be free agents, so they could have some turnover. And I'm not saying their Cardinals will be better next year. What I'm saying is that is a team to watch that the Cardinals could potentially pass up.
Because it feels like the Seahawks, there's no chance. As long as, and if you kind of look at the quarterback situation, you kind of look at the quarterbacks. As long as Russell Wilson's on that team and healthy, combined with Pete Carroll, they're going to be in the mix. You have questions about Jimmy Garoppolo. He looks like a Hall of Famer against the Cardinals. So does everyone else, except for Daniel Jones, and hopefully Doug Hodges. But you feel like if the 49ers can't maintain that same elite defense, you wonder about Jimmy Garoppolo as a winner. And they could be a team that, even if they maintain a good defense, they are not the same team, especially if the Cardinals make improvements. they become like a competitive team instead of an elite team is what the 49ers are right now. And the Rams are kind of in cap hell in the next couple of years because you don't know about Jared Goff after you gave him all that money. Todd Gurley hasn't produced. You've got Jalen Ramsey going to have to get paid. You've got Aaron Donald. So you are in a situation, and they don't have draft picks either. So they're going to have to count on that offensive line play improving on its own and to get back to that elite sort of play that they were playing the last couple of years. But yeah, you're right. The Rams seem like the team that could happen too, because Jared Goff feels like he might be broken, except against the Cardinals. And then the 49ers, there's a chance, and that's only if things go badly in the offseason. And Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't improve. That said, it's going to take a lot for the Cardinals to even move up to a third-place team. They're going to have to they have to continue to make strides offensively, and they don't have to be a great defensively, but they've got to become a competent defensive team. And based on what we've seen this year, the Cardinals aren't anywhere near competent right now. So if they don't do that, I think if all those three come together, you're going to have the Seahawks that are probably going to stay with it, even though the way they're winning games doesn't seem sustainable. You have a potential division where all four teams are right around the same ability. And that makes it really wary because you've got a team like the Seahawks that knows how to win. You've got a Rams team that they do know how to win, and a 49ers team that's figured out how to win, and a Cardinals team that hasn't figured out yet.
Yeah, I mean that's just where the Cardinals are, and that's where they've set themselves back to. And I mean, you look at whether it's the overall record or the division record. I mean, they had an actually not a bad division record in 2017, I believe it was, where they went 4-1-1. But they've dropped off in the division, and they've obviously dropped off as a whole in the NFL. And so when you just look at the fact that right now that's where they're at, they've got to climb over basically. I mean, you don't have the number one pick and then just get better the next year. I mean, look at even the 49ers. They had the second pick in 17, then in 18, I can't remember I think they were like 8th or 9th. I think they traded one, but I can't remember when they took McGlinchey, and then they were second again. So it's not like they got better overnight. They stacked three good draft classes together and were able to become a dominant team. But the thing that they didn't do was that the Cardinals are, I'm assuming, going to do is they didn't panic and make a bunch of changes. And now I'm not saying that they shouldn't fire Vance Joseph or Steve Keim. What I'm saying is that they gave Kyle Shanahan time to get his players and implement his system. Again, I'm not saying the Cardinals should do that with Keim and Joseph, but I do think it's important for Cliff Kingsbury. And I think, and this is kind of my last take on the whole last week, I think the biggest thing that we need to see moving forward is Cliff take a little more ownership of the team as a whole, because it does seem like he's been so invested in the offense, and rightfully so, that's why they hired him, that he's allowed things to go unchecked on the defense. And at this point, I mean, I think we would all agree that it can't continue to happen. And so I think that maybe he needs to be more of the head coach of the entire team, as opposed to just the guy that's the head coach by name, but really is the offensive coordinator.
And maybe that is what if they move on from Vance Joseph, that they avoid that previous head coach or that senior head coach sort of mentor. Now that Cliff's been in the league for a year, he can go get a guy who's been a lifetime coordinator or worked his way up and is due to be a coordinator, that sort of thing, because he can sort of help mold that coach into what he wants to be. Vance Joseph, he is who he is. And yeah. But coming up next on the Rise Up C Red podcast, we're going to wrap this show up talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers. How can the Cardinals possibly bounce back from that loss and defeat the Steelers, a team that's won 4 of their last 5 games, and doing it with no Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, or Le'Veon Bell? That's coming up next on Rise Up C Red. We're back on the Rise Up C Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk, or the best hour plus of Cardinals talk on the web. Cardinals play the Steelers this weekend. This Steelers team is really something, isn't it? They are down to their third-string quarterback, an undrafted rookie, Devlin Hodges. They've been without Juju Smith-Schuster. They've been without James Conner. They don't have Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, or Antonio Brown, and yet they seem to be in a better spot competitively than they have been in any of the years past. What are we to think of this very tough Steelers team, which feels like it's like an early 90s Steelers team?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're just seeing how good of a coach Mike Tomlin is, and that's really what it boils down to. And I think when you look at it from that perspective, you have to respect what Tomlin has done this year. You have to respect what he has been able to achieve and kind of get from his team. And it's similar to what we talked about with like a Brian Flores in Miami, is that it became more about the players that they didn't have than the players they had. And what I mean by that is when you get guys that buy in, and I think that's one of the biggest things we're seeing with the Cardinals, is that when you get guys that buy in to what the coach is selling, it's a lot easier to have success than when you have guys that are either A, not buying in, or B, are doing it on their own terms. I think we're seeing that with the defense more than anything. I think the offense just had a bad day at the office. But I think the defense, you have a lot of guys that, and 2 of them are supposed to be your veteran leaders in Patrick Peterson and Terrell Suggs, that they just don't seem like they buy into what Vance Joseph is selling. And so that's the difference when you look at Pittsburgh. They have a group of guys that buy in. They have leaders in, Villanueva, the offensive tackle, David DeCastro, even Marquise Pouncey, who will be back this week. They have guys on the defensive side of the ball, Cam Hayward. They have Joe Hayden that's, bought in. When you have guys that buy in to what the coach is selling, it's a lot easier to play at a high level and trust each other, even when you're trusting Duck Hodges. You know what I'm saying? Like, and Jalen Samuels and
Benny Snell.
Yeah, Benny Snell. Like, it's just easier to trust your coach and buy into that, and that's just kind of what we've seen. And that's the unfortunate thing right now is I think the offense for the Cardinals is bought in. Like I said, I think it's a bad day. I mean, we'll give them the Steelers game to figure it out, obviously, but I don't think the defense ever bought in, and I think you're seeing the result of that because does the defense lack talent? Yes. Should it be historically bad? No. And I think that's where that's where the struggles for me comes in, and why it's so hard to kind of pin this down.
For me, you look at this defense, and the Steelers' defense is playing really well. They are taking the ball away. Minkah Fitzpatrick has been a revelation. That pick that they traded away, that some people thought would be a top 10 pick, that turned out to be a pretty dang good trade, especially if it's going to be a mid-first, and if they can make the playoffs and be in the bottom third of the first round. That trade for Minkah Fitzpatrick has really, really solidified that defense. They're getting good edge play from Bud Dupree and TJ Watt. They are getting good linebacker play. It's going to be interesting to see, can the Cardinals do anything offensively against that defense? And then secondly, the Cardinals have seen 2 rookie quarterbacks this year. No, not true. They've only seen 1 rookie quarterback, and that's Daniel Jones. And guess what? They flustered him. Maybe they can do that. Kyle Allen, I forget, he's not a rookie, but he's definitely inexperienced. Kyle Allen torched them, carved them up. Daniel Jones struggled. Can the Cardinals actually force Devlin Hodges to make mistakes? If they do, then maybe the defense doesn't look as bad. Now, they weren't good against the run against the Rams, but they showed against the 49ers that they can be stout against the run. And if they can be stout against the run, maybe they won't get torched in the passing game, although that kid Washington is playing really well. Juju and James Conner are both questionable, so if they don't come back, Jaden Samuel, Benny Snell, can they hold them? And then of course, Vance McDonald, is he going to go off for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns, even though that's roughly his career in receptions?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the reality, is we just, it shouldn't be this bad, and it has been, and that's what the hard part is to figure out if they can rebound. The Steelers have played solid defensively since the Fitzpatrick trade. He's been kind of a good difference maker, but he's also, again, I think a lot of it goes back to that when you make a trade like that, you're telling your team, hey, we still believe in you guys. Like, we still see you guys as a team that will be competing. So when you look at it, they started 0-3. They beat Cincinnati they started 0-3 and they lost Ben Roethlisberger in the first game. They beat Cincinnati, who's awful, obviously, but then they lost to the Ravens, and they were 1-4, and they were giving up. You take away the Cincy game where they only gave up 3 points, and they were giving up right around 27.5, 28 points a game. Then they beat the Chargers in week 6, and they went into their bye week 2-4. From there, they've given up, the most that they've given up to a team is 24 points. And that was to the Colts in a win. They lost to the Browns 21-7, but again, they only gave up 21 points. So the defense really turned around after that Ravens game, when they had their game against the Chargers, where they played really well. They're now 6th in scoring defense, which is really good. They're top 12 in rushing yards. They're top 7 in passing yards defensively. Like Jess said, they forced tons of turnovers. They forced the most turnovers in the NFL this year. So the key for the Cardinals, and I mean, again, you go into opponents. They played the Dolphins. I mean, that's not anything great. They beat the Colts 26-24. They shut down the Rams completely, 17-12. Like I said, they lost the Browns 21-7, and then they held, the Bengals and Browns to 10 and 13 points respectively the next couple weeks. So it's not like they've played a bunch of world beaters after that Ravens game, but they've done what they've had to do, and they've found a way to improve on the defensive side of the ball every week. I think that's going to be really the key to this whole thing, is that their offense is just going to do enough to win the game. Their defense is what's going to win the game, and can the Cardinals find a way to get back on track? Because the Steelers' defense is good enough to cause problems and make it difficult, and so that's what it's really going to boil down to for the Cardinals, is can they find a way to win a football game against we'll say good defense, and can their offense do enough to win a game?
Do you see them winning this game? When I wrote my prediction for Sports Weekly publication that USA Today does, I didn't. I had the Cardinals. I had the Cardinals giving up points, and I have the Steelers holding them, and I have the Cardinals losing this game 27-16. I think it's, I'm optimistic, but after seeing how they played last week, I don't see how I can predict a win. And I know Kyle Odegaard wrote about it, and you mentioned it last week, after these big 4-possession losses, teams pretty much improve. They win more often than they lose after huge losses, if you eliminate the outlier Dolphins this year.
Yeah, and so I think that's a big thing, and we talked about that last week. So as usual, we're always a step ahead of everybody else, but that's neither here nor there. When you have a game like that, you have to respond, because if you don't respond, you're basically saying, hey, it's over. Like, we've waved the white flag. Just, chalk up 4 losses or coming out of this game, three more losses, and fast forward to April when the Cardinals are on the clock with the top 3, likely a top 3 or 4 pick, and so you have to respond. And I think your point is accurate. Of like, I don't necessarily know if it means a win, but I think they need to play a relatively close game. So yeah, I think something like you said, like 26-20 would be, a Steelers win. It's obviously not optimal, but it would be at least palatable.
Maybe the Cardinals prove us wrong. Let's wrap up this edition of the show, episode 250. We'll be back in a week to talk more about the Cardinals, as we'll be able to talk about how things turn out against the Steelers, and what lies ahead in revenge game against the Browns, as Steve Wilkes will be coming to town. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. Go Cardinals, and we'll be back again next week. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating, and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise up, See Red.